Okay, we're going to start. If the internet shows up, that would be great. I have internet, but they have a hard wire here, so I have 10 minutes. This is going to be super fast, super exciting. And my name is Jason Beres. I'm with Infragistics. We have a booth downstairs, so if you want to tie some of these pieces together of what I'm going to demo, please see us later on after the presentations end, because I want to just express some concepts here. Oh, thank you very much. And give you some things to think about. So when the session was kicked off, today, you saw on the screen employee experience, customer experience. I really think after I started working through these demos, it was a lot about a developer experience. You know, we talk about developer experience a lot at Infragistics. We build developer tools, but OpenFin has an incredible developer experience, and I'm not going to write maybe a few lines of code, but most of it's done through configuration. So when Gavin talked about all this cloud interop and it's all done through configuration, you know, believe it, because it's kind of real today, and I think it's only going to get better. So I was pretty shocked at how simple this stuff was. This is about Infragistics, if you're not familiar. We've been around for like 30 years. Financial services is a big piece of our business in terms of UI components, low-code tooling, BI, et cetera. And this is my last slide of this presentation. I'm going to show you how to go from something in Figma all the way into an OpenFin workspace using FDC3 and the new Snap SDK, just to kind of highlight how easy this is. The end-to-end demo with like a few mistakes and all that took me about 25 minutes when I recorded it. Then I got it down to like 16 minutes. I have 9 minutes right now. But the point I'm trying to make with these tools that you see and when you hear about productivity for developers is that low-code is real, just like AI is real. Low-code tooling is just going to become more and more prevalent in what you're doing every day or you're using every day to get your job done. So you can't just ignore the fact that these tools exist because it's happening, and it's happening in enterprises big and small. Infragistics is part of that, and so is OpenFin. So with that, I'm going to jump over to my demo because time is limited. So what I'm going to do here first is start with Figma. So what we do at Infragistics with one of our products called App Builder is we allow you to use a WYSIWYG to build out experiences in this low-code tool, and then we generate Angular code, Blazor code, web components code, etc. We also have UI kits and a design system, so you can build stuff in Figma, Sketch. You used to be able to do it in Adobe XD, but now it's Adobe Figma, I guess. And you can build out these screens and then pump them into App Builder and then take it the rest of your development journey. So in this example here, if I'm selecting various areas of the screen, you can see that this is the DOM layout of basically a screen design. This could be the same screen you create in any tool. This happens to be built in Figma. But the cool thing is you're pulling the design process into whatever that outcome is supposed to be, which is what we're all supposed to do anyway, right? We're supposed to include design, include customers in this, and then ultimately the outcomes are what what our customers expect, not what our development team thought of. So in this case, I have this built, the designer already built it. I'm going to use one of our plugins to actually push this application up to the cloud. I have an OpenFin workspace, and I'm just going to call this chart viewer 1234. I'm going to create this app. So this just went up to the cloud, and it created this application for me. It's a simple app because I just want this to be like a micro app inside of an OpenFin workspace. So here is my application, and this is running inside of our low-code tool. And what you can see on the right-hand side is that this is the code that it actually generated. One of the limitations you have with tools like Figma or Sketch is you can't do real data binding, like you can't pull in a REST endpoint and say, here, I want this to be this parameter. So that's what we do in the low-code tool. So to fast forward and accelerate the demo, I already did that. But generally speaking, what you're doing is you are adding endpoints. In this case, I have a Swagger UI. I called it FinTech Cloud. It has a bunch of fake stocks that are available to me. I'm going to bind those to this application, and every time an FDC3 intent comes in, my chart's going to update from some other component that at this point I really don't know anything about. So if I flip over to this view of the same application, what you'll notice here is that there's some data binding syntax. So in this case, I selected something called stock name. So the way this works is once you bind your endpoints to an application, you're just doing what you would normally do in any other tool. If you have some automatic data binding. You're not writing any code, you're just doing all of this interactively. So at this point, now I kind of have data bound here. This is the first record from my FinTech cloud, and my chart data is there. It's not quite perfect yet, but I really do need to get this into my OpenFin workspace. So the next step that you would do is you would generate code. So with App Builder, like I mentioned, you have some options. I didn't know Microsoft was here today, so I want to mention Blazor WebAssembly in case, you know. But here we'll do Angular. So now if I push this up to the cloud, it's going to create a GitHub repository. So I actually did that already. We're not going to watch the cloud try to work. And it essentially creates an entire application up in GitHub. So here is the code. And if I make this look a little bit better, you can see that it's the same exact syntax for the binding that I would need in Angular or any other platform. It's just generated for me. So life is good. This is the TypeScript code. Now there's a couple things here that I added and I merged. Just kind of ignore this because I'm going to add it in a little bit. But ultimately what we do here is we create the services that you need to actually connect to your data source, to your endpoints, and we handle all of that interaction within the component. Now all this code's generated. So what's my next step? Just like you would do back at the office, I'll go back to my stock chart. I would then select my the Git URL, and then I would open this up in Visual Studio Code, which I happen to have right here. Here is the same thing now in Visual Studio Code. Now, in respect of time, I made 3 changes to this before I did an npm install, and I'm going to highlight what those changes are right now. I needed to enable FDC3. So I needed the context from the Finos FDC3 types. So you just do an npm install on those types, and that's all you need to do to enable all of the syntax that you need for FDC3. And then this code here used to be in the ng on init. And I modified it slightly to send a parameter as an endpoint, and I put it in its own deal here because I need this to work with FDC3. So how do I get this application to actually work with FDC3 in an OpenFin workspace? And this is where I talk about the developer experience. So in this case, there's a few lines of code to actually make sure that I'm working within the context of a workspace. And then there's another couple lines of code to make sure that if an intent's coming across, I'm actually using it. In this case, I'm hard coding UNH, which is one of my fake stocks. But I have some code snippets here, and what I want to do on ng on init is just check, that I'm running within the context of FDC3 in a workspace. So this is code you've seen 1,000 times in every example. In fact, I didn't invent this code. I copy and pasted it from one of the workspace starters on GitHub on the OpenFin GitHub space. And now I need my context handler. The context handler is actually what's going to pass the value to this get item. So let's just type this in. Let's go back to OpenFin, and there's my context handler. And this, again, is code you've seen 100,000 times. I'm just getting the stock. What am I doing with the stock? I'm going to go ask this method to make my call and then populate my chart with that particular stock. This has been compiling in the background. It's ready to go. How do I get this working inside of OpenFin? Well, right now, inside of OpenFin, I've got 2 screens running in my workspace. I've got this guy here, which is a pretty lame-looking grid, but it actually will pass an intent to whoever's listening for this stock type, and then I've got some of the other defaults. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to close this out, and I'm going to actually close the window. There we go. And I'm going to jump back over to the running OpenFin workspace app that I have running. And this is directly from GitHub. I made no changes to this code. I only added what I'm going to add right now. So this is called the Snap Starter. and you're going to see how easy it is now to enable my new application. So the first thing is everything does work through configuration. There's a couple ways to do that. In this particular sample, the configuration was done through app.ts. So all of the screens that are running inside the platform, the JSON is here. In other examples, you'll notice that they're in the manifest. So depending on what sample you pick up, it's going to be a little bit different. So in this case, I want to add my, my chart. So I'm going to go up here, and I have a couple code snippets here. So the first thing is I want to add this chart configuration. The only thing, I mean, I know there's important things in here, but from your application perspective, to get any application running inside of a platform, you need a manifest to that app. So what this JSON is actually doing is it's got some basic information, some things that it's waiting for in terms of intents. All that's just sort of boilerplate, some tags. What you need to do is you need to give that manifest the information of where your application's running. So in this case, if I type in snap again, I'm going to use that local chart viewer that I have, which is running at localhost 4400. So that's this app right here. That's this guy. Whoops. That is this guy, which you can kind of see right here. And there's nothing displayed anymore because it doesn't have anything passing to it to FTC3. It's not running in the context of anything, so it's not doing much. So at the same time, if you remember, that grid that I had in my application was pretty brutal looking. It didn't look good, whatever. The design team said, we did a new grid for you. Please add it to the application. So I don't know anything about this app. I was just told to add it. All I know is the URL of where it's at. So I'm just going to add another configuration here. So this is the grid configuration, and I'm going to call it IG stock grid. And the manifest, again, is where it's going to pull this from. So if I go to this JSON, now I added these two JSONs like beforehand. You would add a JSON, you would tell it the location, you would put that in. But here in the grid, I'm going to do this running in, Microsoft Azure. So again, I did not know Microsoft was going to be here tonight, but this works out perfect. My grid viewer, I created something in App Builder, I deployed it to GitHub, and then right from GitHub, I deployed it as an Azure static web app. So this is actually running at Lemon Coast. You know, when you do an Azure static web app, it gives you some funky URLs unless you give it a specific domain. So that's where this guy's running at. And then the last thing I need to do is I need those IG stock grid and my IG stock chart to actually show up inside of the dialog, which lets me open up these specific applications. So this is where we get the return. So I'm going to add the stock chart, and I'm going to add the stock grid. And then my boss just saw this webinar about something called the Snap SDK, and they want the Snap SDK now. So what do I do there? Well, after doing a bunch of different sort of learnings on the 2 GitHub samples and watching that webinar, I realized the Snap SDK is pretty simple to implement. So there's a couple things you need to do. In the manifest for this particular application, you need to tell the application where to get the Snap stuff. So what's going to make Snap work? So there's a npm install, and then there is this CDN, which has additional Snap things that you can light up your application with Snap. In this sample, there is sort of generic code here in the Snap SDK about downloading the assets. There's nothing really that critical in here except this line of code, which is initializing, or these 3 lines of code, which is initializing the Snap SDK. So you create an instance of this Snap object, and then you're waiting for the Snap server to start. But there's also this enable auto window registration, which is going to make sure that any window that's created in the context of this workspace will automatically have the ability to snap. And that's it. So how do I light all this up? Well, in my provider, I commented out 1 line of code. This is all you need to do because this code here, as far as I can tell, is fairly generic. Like there's nothing secret sauce here. It's where you're just lighting this up in your app. And that's all I'm doing. Few lines of configuration. I'm going to do an npm run build on this. And on this guy, I am going to, when that starts, we'll do an npm run client. And we'll see my entirely new experience that we have in a little longer than 10 minutes, sorry, Mitra. This will be 2 seconds here because this is like the end of the demo. Sorry about that. All right, so now what do I got? I have my stock chart, I have my stock grid. Let's go ahead and take a look at this new grid. Looks way better than my previous grid, has some additional features. Let's bring this back up. Let's take a look at my stock chart. Now this stock chart now magically has all of the intents are being passed. And remember, I didn't write any code in my workspace. That's all configuration. It's all done automatically for you. And then, of course, I could drag this and stick it over there. But what I want to do is I want to snap it to this other window. So like magic, this just sort of worked. Now, there's other windows here as well. In the SDK, there is a sample called a native test app. This, I don't know what it's written in. You can ask Gavin later. It might be WPF. It might be Rust. I'm not sure. But this is a separate native app. And the whole point here is when we talk about native apps like Excel or some legacy app that you have that's running in the context of FDC3 through the runtime on that machine or soon to be cloud, all of this stuff works together, and I don't need to do any extra code to make it happen. If I want to break this guy off, I can put this here, I can stick this here, and then I can snap this now over here if I want, and that is the end of the demo. I hope you got the point of what we're trying to, or what I'm trying to show here, is how easy it is to pull all this stuff together. Super simple, few lines of configuration. If you want to learn more about how we did all of the glue, come downstairs after, and thank you, Mitra, for giving me a couple extra minutes.